Welcome to the Craftsman Podcast, where we want to help build people who love better, live better, and leave the world better through raw and honest conversations.
Let's go.
My biggest, I'll call it a struggle. My biggest struggle that I'd say I deal with today is, how do I know that what I'm doing is right? And I want to touch on that a little bit by saying, it's very easy to say like, oh, this is right. But when you believe that the people who say this is right are comfortable with lying to you, then how do you know which of the things coming out of their mouth or their book or their scroll or whatever is right and what's been tampered with?
Okay. This is a really great question. So you're talking about, are we talking about morality, right and wrong, or fundamental truth? Like what is true? Regarding, because there's a lot of religions in the world. There are pieces of all of them that are true according to what I think is true.
So I think, and I'll kind of get a little weird with it, I think most religions focus off of like symbolism. And they use things that were real. Like Jesus was real, very real. Jesus is the way to heaven. But other religions as well were able to take these ideas, these powerful things, these influential things, and then be like, hey, I'm going to tweak this way. And to me, religion,
yes,
not
there's a difference.
Faith through Christ.
Yep.
But religion was designed for power and money.
And control.
Let's Google how much money the Vatican has right now.
For sure.
Right? And that's what Jesus wants. He wants you to be loaded.
So here's what I'll say. And here's funny, something's funny. Being loaded or being poor is not the point. The question is contentment. This is what the scriptures talk about.
Okay.
He says, it's not a sin to be rich. It is a problem to be mastered by your riches, right? So when it influences the way you think, and it influences your willingness to stray from the path, that's the problem. That's why Jesus says things like, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's not that the rich can't enter, it's that they are usually sidetracked by their affluence. Because it feels like a really great substitution for God. God provides, he promised to provide. He doesn't promise over an abundance necessarily, but he promised to provide. Well, money provides for us. Okay, security. Love. I feel you can buy whatever you want.
You sure
these
can.
days, right?
Yep.
Here's what I always go to. Take that to the end of the argument. For the end of your days, there's two things that I think about. I just read it this morning. You didn't bring anything into this world, and you'll take nothing with you. That's one thing. Whether a lot or a little. And then the second thing is, there's this story that Jesus tells about this rich young ruler, and he's amassing wealth and influence, right? And happens to be agriculture because that's their time. He's like, man, I've got more grain. Instead of being generous, what does he do? He tears down his old barns, builds bigger barns so he can fill it with all his overabundance. And then it says in the story, Jesus says, and then God called his life. And everything he had was left for somebody else. So the point is, hey, you have an overabundance, great. Live generously. I don't think that we live in the scriptures can feel socialist. If you look really hard, I have this argument with my brother a lot. It's a fun argument. It's interesting. The problem with socialism, the problem with any social system is the sin of man. This is where it always breaks down. Should everybody have the same? That sounds like a great idea. Hey, we all have what we need.
Writing.
It sounds wonderful. Yeah. But at some point, you or I are going to want more and will be unwilling to give what we have to somebody else because God is real and the sin of man is real.
Yep.
It's played out every single day. This is why government systems don't work in general.
100%.
Capitalism, you can argue, well, capitalism is the best. Okay, it's still not good enough.
I agree.
And it still lends itself to power control and, right?
And that's where I actually love this conversation to go a bit is, I think, and I'm not trying to sound like a curmudgeon, but I think...
Sound like whatever.
I think the world is so evil.
It is.
I mean, I mean, the average person just pulls the sheet over their head because they cannot comprehend how far down the rabbit hole. It talks about God returning and like things are so bad, right? And we're thinking like, oh man, look at all the murder and happening. Like that's what's so bad. Like no, that's been around forever.
A long time.
That's not it. We are so much further past that to the point that our governments, our non-government organizations are going out of their way to push God out of people's lives.
Yes.
I think, and I will stop here on
You don't
this
have to stop
conversation.
here at all.
The whole
Say it.
the whole concept of the heliocentric model of we are pointless flying through space and taken away from what is literally talked about living under a firmament of the heavens. Every religious book talks about the layers of heaven under a firmament. But a priest scientist a long time ago said, you know what? The Big Bang, that's what we're going to run with.
Sure.
And that right there has bred constantly a push away from what is real. And the real thing is there is a God.
Yeah.
There is a purpose for us. We very much have a purpose in our lives. And we don't even understand the rules of the game because we're looking at a Monopoly board and they have told us Scrabble rules.
Right. But it's not even about false rules. And here's what I've talked about this with a number of people. The lie that the enemy told in the garden, and whether you believe the garden is literal, I happen to believe it's in there for a reason. I happen to believe it's a thing because it speaks to the same lie being told with different skin, right? God said, before everything was, he is, right? An infinite God. He creates everything. Now, we could get into whether are we the first time he's created things. I think we already know that there are worlds, there are planets. Now, whether there's other life, I don't know. I'll say this briefly and we'll move back into the conversation, which is if there are other created beings anywhere in all of the universe, time, space, continuum, or whatever, it doesn't matter because God created them and it's because his character doesn't change. There are certain rules that it has to play by. Right. And we might be creative in our understanding or our hypotheses of what they are, but God still is at the top. Sidebar for some other time, probably. In respect to the way the world works, there was something given that was good. Hey, you can eat from all the stuff. I've given everything that you need is available to you.
Yep.
However, for your benefit, for your sake, so that you can live a life of peace and intimacy with me, God says, don't eat from this. You have everything you need. Trust me. It goes back to this trust, right? And there was this lie. The lie that was told in Genesis was, did God really say, and he's holding back from you? He's holding out on you. He's trying to make it so you're actually missing out on something where God said, you're not missing out on anything. And I was like, that doesn't sound right.
You don't believe that.
And then that moment of doubt, that seed of doubt has then permeated everything. And that we then decided we knew better, right? When we ate the fruit, we could get into who sinned more, Eve or Adam. I always hold Adam accountable because God already told him. And then Eve came and he knew the rules. And he didn't, hey, babe, don't do that.
I'm going to be a good partner here.
No, he did what we do when we're following girls around, which is whatever you say, babe.
All right.
Whatever you say. And we're culpable for that.
Yeah.
So what the world that we see now is these detours and these distractions. And they're the same distraction, the same detour the devil gave Adam and Eve in the garden. And our response to them is the exact same thing that they did. It's the same problem from the beginning of time. And you look at the evil in the world, I agree with you. But if you look at like ancient Rome and Greece, the depravity that they lived in, we're getting there again. I'm telling you, it is going this way. And it's going this way very quickly.
Yes.
So then the question is,
a lot of similarities between our time and the end of Rome right now.
Do you ever question So Jesus didn't come back during that time either. I mean, he came into that time. It makes me wonder if the return of Christ is going to be, the last thing will be very similar to what he came into the first time in culture and depravity. But do you ever ask the question, why not yet? If it's so evil?
Yeah, I have. And that's what scares me. It's because when I think about it at the end, which is, I also think a part of human nature, it's always the doomsday thing, right? What's going to end it? But I think it's kind of unfair to me because I feel like I've only had my eyes open to a lot of things as of recently. So
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a part of me that I am nervous because when I genuinely look and in my core, I feel that these massive groups of power and people are pure evil. It makes me think that the world is in such a place right now that, for one, we're not recoverable in a typical fashion we would think about. We would need, I don't know, a savior.
The good news, we have one.
Exactly. Well, and I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think he's going to come back rocking it, man. Like he's not going to be rocking the robe and the Birkenstocks. Like,
well, it's said, that's so funny. Birkenstocks. I think Jesus would have liked Birkenstocks. He probably had a pair.
I mean, I'm
He
sure
had the
he
best
did.
pair.
Yeah. I mean,
it's funny.
they weren't Birkenstocks back then. It was
No.
just something created, but that's exactly what it was.
I think the way we know he's coming back as a conquering king, right? He came as a baby. He lived a certain. Jesus was not a pacifist. He never was a pacifist. He was always direct, but he spoke truth in love. That's the combo that we miss these days. Like when you get online and you see people talking about these things, they are at each other and they don't understand how to have a truthful, direct conversation in love. In love doesn't mean agreement. In love doesn't mean affirmation, right? I have a lot of people I disagree with, lifestyle, morality, faith, belief, but I can love them anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the way that will change the world. A lot of the Christian nationalism that is prevalent in church, and I'll say that on purpose because I think that people equate their Christianity with their republicanism or their democratism or whatever their ism is.
Yeah.
Instead of truthfully letting the scriptures be the standard, because the scriptures are pretty clear, right? When the government sucks, whether you think it does or not, we can let that
Government
be for now.
sucks. I know you're listening to this government.
So, no, I bet you.
Y'all are
they're probably
garbage.
not listening, but I'll tell you this. Even so, our kingdom is higher, our king is higher, and our trust is in something that allows us to love people anyway. So you talk about, let's say there's a group of people who are at the top, control, power, money, they have all the influence. They can't control a person who is already under the control of Christ. Not really. And the way that we combat that as Christians is much different than the world does.
Right.
Right? The world is like arm in arm, locked and loaded. We definitely should talk about that at some point. This is probably offline because what we were talking about before we started this. Because I actually think that preparation in general for all sorts of things is necessary. We should be prepared for everything. But that's another thing. But specifically in our faith and how do you combat evil? Well, if you go by the scripture says what? That our fight is against not flesh and blood, but principalities, darkness in the heavenly realms, all those sorts. So it's a spiritual thing that goes on. There's only one way to deal with that. And that's your spiritual means. Prayer. There's some other things. There's some, which I believe very much in the spiritual realm. In the heavenlies, I believe there are dark forces that are spiritual.
Same.
That I could look a person in the eye. You've seen people.
And
they're,
you know
they're
it.
not.
You
there's
know
something
it.
else
Yep.
behind it.
Yes.
And you're like, how do I not harm the human but deal with the spirit? We'll get into that another day. But dude, it's a real thing.
That's a
man.
big battle, man. That's a big battle.
It's a real thing. So I think that we have, gosh, there's so much. And as a parent, and your kids are growing up, and I think about this a lot, like, okay, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Every generation has felt this way, by the way. Our parents felt this way about us.
Well, I mean,
For good reason. We were knuckleheads.
I think they've always been right.
No, it is. In fact, it's deteriorating.
Yeah, we keep telling ourselves that we're hitting pinnacle each generation, we have deteriorated over and over for generation after generation.
This is why I don't believe in evolution.
Oh, I 100% don't believe in evolution. Show me one time where a species jumped to another species.
Correct.
That's never happened, so that cannot be a thing.
You want to talk
Not
about
even a
in-species
discussion.
adaptation? I'm willing to have a conversation about that.
As long as it stays in that species.
Agreed. But the other reason that I don't believe in it is because we watch degradation, extinction, deterioration
In everything.
in everything, right? We don't have more species, we have less. And when we discover something we haven't found, doesn't mean that it hasn't always been there, right? We like to think, oh, it's a new one. No, you just finally found it.
Yep.
God's up there going,
God's been there forever.
yeah, Lee,
I forgot about that one. Forgot I put that one there.
That's so funny. So I think that we have to remember, kind of pull out of the minute minutia of life. Because as a parent, I get locked in sometimes. I worry. I can fret. I hate admitting that, but it's true. And if we can pull back, we can encourage one another and say, hey, don't forget. What's the main thing? Here's the main thing. When we're out of control, God isn't. When we run out of ideas, He doesn't. When we can't see our family to care for them, He does and is and will. Now, I will probably have a beef with the Lord because it doesn't happen as fast as I want, as clean as I want, and without any damage. But that's not His fault.
Yeah.
That's our fault. We're the ones that create damage in the world. God is the one that is continually bringing grace and restoration from all the stuff that we create,
Yeah, so the way you say that, and it's kind of something earlier, I think the earth is evil. I think most people are evil, but we talk about the presence of God and how it's there. It's a freaking water cooler. All you got to do is turn it on.
Yeah.
All you literally have to do is turn it on and you can fill your cup. But the problem is everyone around you is watching that water cooler.
Yeah.
And it's one part of it is like, oh, do I go to the water cooler? And the other part of it is like, who even uses a water cooler anymore? Like they've done such a good job of damaging iconic things that push people away from Jesus. They've done it so well that we live in a society where it's normal to think some of the things that we think are okay.
Right.
Right. And I'm not going to get into political things, but they're topics people talk about. Every political thing,
the cycle
you either
comes
believe
through.
in something or you don't believe in something.
Right.
But at the end of it all, especially when we talked about the end times, and most stories that talk about crazy things, you take, for example, Noah, and you're like, all right, so that was the one crazy guy who was like, man, I have this really weird calling. Everyone else thinks I'm nuts. I need to do this. And that's how I feel sometimes. Sometimes I feel like everyone around me, not everyone, but the majority of people around me are so consumed by the material of everything and the instant gratification of everything that they have let go of what we genuinely are. We, and I mean this wholeheartedly, everything we consume today is poison. We eat poison, the water is poison, the air is poison, and the majority of the stuff that we are putting in our ears is poison.
Sure.
And so how did we get to a society where it is so incredibly self-destructive that it's normal? I have a family member who showed up to a family event. And he's like, my stomach hurts. Like, it's been hurting. I'm like, what did you eat today? And he's like, well, I had Chick-fil-A. Everyone knows Chick-fil-A tastes delicious.
Yeah, it's good.
It's so many chemicals in it. In every fast food. There's so many
all of our
things in
food
it.
is filled with preservatives now.
And it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why is that okay? When I hear that, that makes me think that, and I don't mean this literally when I say God is not winning.
Sure.
That's not what I mean. What I'm saying is the presence of Satan has grown into where it's okay. Not only is it okay, but when I say, hey, you really shouldn't eat whatever because it's bad for you, I am looked at like I'm just keep to yourself. And it's like, why is it bad to get back to more natural And that's
Yeah.
what I think. I think spirituality deals a lot with who we are naturally at our core. This is
Sure.
all a freaking meat suit.
Yeah.
It's all a meat suit. And in our energy, our aura, we have an electromagnetic field that is put out and that's a real thing. And when we talked about seeing or feeling it with people,
Yeah.
it's how we interact. And just because we've removed ourselves spiritually and become so materialistic, we don't know that that's the check engine light.
We don't even know what's right and wrong.
Yeah. They're like, I need to fix that
Yeah.
because we're like, this is just the norm.
Yeah. So there's this idea in the Bible that talks about how as we go, it says the love of most will grow cold, and they're going to believe the things that are evil are good, and they're going to call good evil. And God says, beware if you're that person who calls good evil and evil good. And I think I don't know the answer specifically, except this, that there's going to be an increase of people who seek Jesus to do the things that are godly. We have to be careful we don't turn into religious zealots because,
It was way better than kooks.
right? Because we can make our thing the new religion. We got to be very cautious of that. But I think that there's going to be an increase of people who say, I want to pursue Jesus. It's okay. If you're not going to do it, that's fine. I think that there's a right way and a wrong way. I'm going to do my best to follow Jesus. There's going to be an increase of people that say, you're crazy. Now, we're just teaching First Peter talks about it. Stuff in Romans talks about it. Ephesians talks about it, where they will look at you and call you crazy for doing the right things. So the answer, though, is to keep doing the right things. And I think we have to manage our expectations of outcome. So your job is to do the right thing. And when the opportunity comes up, to speak the truth in love to other people, and then let God do his thing. Right?
Do your part and let it.
Because if you expect others to do it because it's right, even though they don't believe it to be right, you're going to make yourself crazy. So I think that it's important for us as Christians to seek and pursue God. Tell people what the truth of Jesus is about. That's where freedom is found. And then let the Spirit of God work in them the way it worked in you and the way it worked in me. Because 6 years ago, you're a different person than you are now.
Very. Yeah.
And in your faith, you've learned along the way. You didn't get to this point of going, hey, this is what we need to do, right?
Yeah.
Just overnight. So for us, we have to create an expectation for others that affords them the opportunity and the space for God to actually shift and move them, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
But it's hard because when you see it so clearly and you watch people walking in death, essentially, it's hard.
So here's one this one eats at me, right? So I'm like, you're a great person to ask this question and just pick your brain on. So I've been struggling for like, I'd say it's probably 2 years. And it's going to sound so crazy. I've been struggling about Christmas.
Oh yeah, what about it?
If it has nothing to do with Christ, to mainstream.
Oh, the mainstreaming of Christmas.
Like Santa Claus. It's about Santa Claus, which quite honestly stems from a pagan religion. Nimrod. There's a whole underlying thing about Nimrod. When he died, a spruce tree grew.
I've heard that one.
His significant other placed
Sure.
balls on the tree. He made a wish list for kids that he would give presents to. Like he had a reindeer and a spruce. Those were his symbols. And like Nimrod was not a good person. He built the Tower of Babel.
Sure.
Like to fight God.
Right.
And his birthday is celebrated in the winter solstice every year. I don't know, late December timeframe. Yeah. And it's just normal for us to go buy material items
Sure.
over and over and over again. Praise this anagram, Santa. This false god that we're praising, and the glory does not go to him.
Yeah.
And I can see that. I can see that there's a problem with it. Where I really struggle with it is, why is the church okay with it? And why? So, for example, I'm not a great problem solver. I do fairly well. And my concept that I've pitched to my wife, because she is the one that levels me, was I know this would be against mainstream, but what if for Christmas we did 3 gifts from the representing the 3 wise men? So it's a conversation piece where we actually have, and it doesn't mean you get a phone, a book, and you get the phone and the case. Like, it's a thing, it's put together, but to where they're not neglected from an opportunity to receive things in society, but where it's actually geared towards the actual teaching and the praise in Christ. And to me, like, why would the referee, the church, not clear that up? Why would it not be like, hey, I love this really cool tradition, by all means, enjoy it, but this is not normal. And when you go to church and the conversation there is talking about all the mainstream things that deal with Santa, Christmas and Santa Claus and catering to the people, if you will, at the end of it, like, is that right? Yeah. And is that okay? And that, again, is the reason where I struggle with the authenticity of, is what I'm receiving genuine? Yeah. Or is it because there is a goal to control? Right. And I'm not saying control to do necessarily bad things,
but just to have
control, to have a level of control.
I think the Christmas thing's an interesting conversation, and because this is the first time we're talking about it, there's other things I'd want to bring in, but I've not heard the full thing about Nimrod. I know about Nimrod. I know his place in the scriptures. I know who he was, and I know his part of the text. But regarding Christmas specifically, I have to look at it just because I haven't read it. Yeah. But I do think that that Christmas has become a place of idolatry in the church, because I'm sure you've read also the other side, that the symbols are actually Christian. You can make them whatever you want. Here's the fundamental underlying truth I think that I'm trying to get at. If you are mastered by the need for excess and it becomes a materialistic and it's really about yourself, it's not okay. Bottom line. Santa Claus is not an alive person who's watching you, right? It seems to be that we talk about him almost like he's God. This is a great lie of the enemy for sure. Also, don't let your kids listen. I don't know what you're doing with your kids. I have my own thoughts about whether you should or shouldn't tell your kids about Santa Claus and this and that. I'm just making sure if you're listening and your kids are in the car, I'm about to blow up their whole life. But 3, like Santa's 2, dead, right?
1. Yeah.
And Jesus is real and he is alive.
Yes.
Right? There is one true living God. I believe that with my whole soul. All others are dead. Jesus Christ, because of his own claims, not because of mine. I didn't make it up. He is alive and will come back. So to worship anybody else is idolatry. Anything else is idolatry. This doesn't mean I can't love somebody of another faith or religion. That's not what I'm saying.
It's different. It's not idolizing.
What I am saying, though, specifically as the church who believes in the Bible as the Holy Scriptures and the way to live our lives, we should not conform to a worldly view of Christmas. And as a pastor, my job is to make sure that we are fundamentally worshiping God, period. That the birth of Christ, I know that he wasn't born December 25th, like, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Right? I can celebrate that, though, as what it is and call the church to understand, look, if you give gifts, I love the idea. This is about the gifts that were brought to Christ. We're celebrating the star on the top of the tree. That's about the star that brought them to Christ. Like, we can talk about it, right?
Yeah, 100%.
We don't, as a church, and I'll just say this, I hope our church does it okay.
I'm sure they do.
Maybe not. But I think we have to always be willing to acknowledge and assess. We should be able to make it about Jesus Christ, because that's what it's about. To celebrate the birth of a Savior, to know the purpose of his birth, how it affects us as human beings, and how it should affect how we live our lives. Right? Christmas has become a complete crap show.
Yeah.
And as a society, we've bought hook, line, and sinker. I feel the same way about Valentine's Day. We don't have to get into all this.
Oh, we don't even celebrate Valentine's Day.
But it's like, you're like, well, don't you love your wife? Yes. 365 days for the rest of my life. And sometimes I do okay, and sometimes I stink at it. But I'm going to continue to show her value and my love for her through all the means necessary all the time. But in regards to the church, I do think the church, and I think this is important differentiate. I'm not talking about the actual church, which is the people. Burn all the buildings down, the church will thrive.
Yes, agreed. And that's
But church as,
what we should be.
church as, don't get me started on that. But church as, places of worship, we'll call them.
Yeah.
That look more, anyways, place of worship, which is not fundamentally wrong
No.
to be there.
No.
But when that house becomes a place of robbers and thieves,
Which is, they flock to it.
that when you use worldly means to attract people to the place and prop up a person, and you forget that the invitation is to brokenness and humility.
Yeah.
The invitation is to know God more, to worship and make a big deal about Jesus Christ. That's the name that's lifted up, right? By his name, all men will come to him and be saved and all the things. That's where it becomes dangerous. So can you celebrate Christmas? Sure, celebrate Christmas. But make sure that you're not doing it in an idolatrous way, and it's really about worldliness and self-centeredness and self-serving, right? And as the church, we have to lead the way in that, obviously.
So and this is another one. Sorry, you've unraveled some. What is Jesus' birthday?
You know, I have heard different things. The truth is, I don't actually know the exact time he was born. It's probably closer to spring, is my understanding.
I think it's April 1st. But
So,
okay. Yeah.
you know what I mean? And look, there is a whole host of theories that everybody's going to be, no, it is this day. Very similar to the return of Christ. Nobody knows. Here's the thing. Nobody knows the day and time. Not even Jesus. Jesus himself said, no one knows the day or time of the return of the Son except the Father, which means Jesus is waiting for the go-ahead. He's not asking when, but when the Father says go, he's going to go. So that's kind of how I feel about it. Regarding the birth of Christ, based on the stories, history, context, it's probably closer to the springtime, is my understanding.
So the cool thing about the Bible is people want to be like, it's a holy book. It's wildly historical. There's
Lots of history in it, sure.
Why would they leave that out?
What do you mean?
Why would they leave the date or the actual time? Like, and that leads me to believe somebody, some power somewhere, some dark, nefarious being said, I don't want you to know that actual day. That's a day of power. And maybe even going really far and saying, we'll do it like the 1st of April. We'll let everyone call it April Fool's Day because nobody
maybe
knows.
But here, is the date actually that important? And here's what I mean by that. We get locked in on dates and times. Steve is guarding the house right
He's
now.
letting you know
can
it's
hear that.
time.
Yeah, he's like, hey guys, it's time to wrap it up.
Yeah.
He says that we should be prepared for like the actual thing, right? The return of Christ. That's a heart posture. That's the way that we actually interact in the world. Are we going to be found doing the things that God wants us to do, right? We get locked in on dates, believing that a day has power. The power isn't in the day. The power is in,
100%.
and I know you know that's not what you're saying, but I don't know, man. Was it kept out? Was it not kept out? I don't know. I don't think that it's the main thing.
Oh, I don't think it's the main thing either.
I know. I don't. This is hard when you start getting into like the scrolls and which parts are there. I had this. You probably hear this. You've probably thought about this. Well, it was just written by people, right? Yeah, and the combination of the scriptures we know now, there was a council, there was people that put it together. I understand that. The question is God able to have put it together the way he wanted it anyway?
Yeah. Yes. And the answer
Absolutely,
is
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in light of that, we have to always remember, though, the way that information, especially the scriptures, were passed down. When you had scribes writing, they wrote with such reverence and a deep humility before God. They knew that the reputation of God was on the line, and they had such a reverence for God. When they would come to the name of God, what we know to be Yahweh, what he gave Moses, before they wrote that name, they would wash. They would wash themselves, ceremonial washing. They would get a new pen. They would dip it one time in the ink. they would write the name and break the pen so it never wrote another word. That was the only word that it wrote.
Wow.
Then every time they came to the name.
That is so cool.
So when you think about that, and you think about the extent to be accurate, right, out of reverence for God, then it starts to make a little more sense in, people could have left things out. People could have done that. But there are far more people willing to preserve, right?
Mm-hmm.
In actuality, I think. There are people who, like going back to the military, who want to preserve a measure of freedom. There are people who are willing to give their lives to preserve the word of God.
Right.
I think in the same way. Doesn't diminish the fact that people will always try to destroy it. Think about it. I mean, the devil wants to destroy all of it.
100%. And they're going to target, and that's why I talked about the church. And
Yeah.
like you talked about the robbers and thieves. Bad people are going to flock where people are vulnerable.
Sure.
The Boy Scouts, whatever it may be, people are going to go to where you can get away with it. It doesn't mean that the organization itself is corrupt. It just means it's enticing to other people who would like to take advantage of that. So, all right, I like your thoughts on Christmas. I'm curious. I'm still curious on some things. And
Sure.
we talked about a little bit. You talked about how they wrote, and
Yeah.
there's where I think the influence comes in is where you see it, for example, like the King James Bible, right? So there's the Ethiopian Bible, there's Old
Sure.
Testament. So like literally in the name, we're like, hey, it's this dude's opinion Bible.
It does seem that way.
In a way, right?
Sure.
And that's if this is what I will say to kind of if there is an opportunity there for something to be manipulated or corrupted, there is going to be somebody there who would like to take advantage of it.
Sure.
Do I think that they're successful every time? No. And part of, like you said, that they wrote it correctly, there's no argument there. And
Sure.
I love the way you're saying that. My question is, since then, has things been played with? And then
Sure.
is part of it that I should take the effort to say, I'm going to go to the original. I need
Sure.
to learn Aramaic.
Greek. Yep, Aramaic, Greek, Hebrew, sure.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, every translation that's come out, like say outside of the King James, right? The goal is to go to the original text. This is what translators generally do. They don't translate from another translation.
Right.
They're translating from the original text. And there are some people who take advantage of the opportunity. Truthfully.
Yeah,
And there are things we miss in English. So I go back to this thing about the Spirit of God working. The Spirit of God can translate things the right way for those who are wanting to listen. And without the Spirit of God, you can make it say whatever you want. The truth is, there is a truth.
Yeah.
There is a standard. There is an absolute right and an absolute wrong. There's a lot of things that seem gray to me because, right? Because I'm a human being and I don't understand God all the way. But God is absolute. I trust that specific thing. So where I fail and falter to understand is not a deficiency of God, but a deficiency in myself to understand.
To understand it.
So then the pursuit, here's what I would tell people, keep pursuing truth. Pursue the absolute in your inability to be that. Because I don't think it's about finding all the answers all right now. Because to this, there's lots we're gonna definitely have to come back and
There's
talk
a
about some more.
purpose for me. I have to go through this.
You do have to.
I have to go
and
through
I would
all of
tell you
this.
to keep doing it.
I'm going to.
But you must be submitted to God. You have to listen to the influence of the Spirit. And you have to, when you settle on some measure of conviction, live to that conviction, whether it's the same as mine or not.
Right.
What does that Bible say? It says, if at some point you disagree, Paul says this in Philippians 3, if you disagree with my measure of conviction, make sure you live up to your measure of conviction and continue to let God do his thing, right? That's a paraphrase. Here's what I'll say. I think we'll round it out with this. If the world is evil, we should be prepared. The question is, what are we prepared for? The Bible says, Paul writes to Timothy, 2 Timothy 4, he says, be prepared in season and out of season, but make sure that you're prepared spiritually because the physical realm's going away.
100%.
This is not going to last.
It's not necessarily,
right?
It makes us sick.
Is that exactly right? So we can't prepare. It's like, why do we have so much Botox, plastic surgery, in an effort to try to live forever when we're not going to live forever on this earth. It's going away. So our preparation needs to be spiritual. This is why Paul tells, he also writes, he says, look, physical training is of some value. It's good, right? You're a beefy man.
Yeah.
This is
What's your temple?
Yeah. So we take care of it. And yes, you want to be healthy for as long as you can. But if you neglect the spiritual training, if you neglect a life of prayer and submission to God, you neglect a life that leads with humility and service, and you neglect understanding the scriptures, if you're not prepared spiritually, you won't be able to last either way. And I think that our preparation, we should be prepared in any of our circumstance, but to share the good news, to offer the goodness, like the hope that you have.
Yeah.
Because gosh, the world can feel hopeless at times, doesn't it?
Oh man,
But
been there.
Right? But the hope that we have comes from something outside of ourselves. We're not fixing any of this. Should we try? Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
all
part
for
of
trying.
it. Yeah, putting in the effort,
Yes.
but it's not. It's just through us.
Be light in the darkness,
Yeah.
right? Like your wife. She has the light of Christ and she exudes it. It overflows out of her, right?
Yes.
So I think for us, a good word here for us to finish here. We might have to do part 2, part 3. Who knows how many of these we'll do together.
Laura already said that.
But I'd say we might have to make this a 2-parter just because. But I think that as we prep for the world that we're in, to invest and to move forward and to try to heal and restore, because we're supposed to be a part of that work of God,
Yeah.
that we cannot neglect offering the hope of the world, which is Jesus, to the world. Going back to the very beginning of the conversation, is a 7, 8-year-old brother who was worried about his older sister. We can't neglect that thing, because if we have everything we have in the world, but we forfeit our soul, we lose everything. And how do we help our brothers and sisters, physical, friends, neighbors? We all want them to stand before God acquitted because of Jesus.
Yeah.
And the only way they're going to do that is if they have Jesus. So why are we not talking about it
I agree.
in a way that is loving and kind?
Yeah.
Dude, thank you so much for this.
This is awesome.
This is a blast, man. I'll look forward to the next one. Thank you guys for listening. As always, if you would do me a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel, go to the Spotify, and I think you have to follow, leave a comment. That helps, a rating or whatever. Yeah, leave some comments. If you have some ideas about what we're talking about, put them in there so we can dialogue, and we'll answer. I'll go back and maybe do some more research about Nimrod and Christmas just to
Yeah.
make sure it's in there.
I'd
so
love
we
to
have
just
it.
throw some things around. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you. You guys have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Let's go.